and welcome to News Night. I'm Amritpal Singh. This is a show in which we tell you what happened around the globe and in the country in the day just going by. Well, much happened. India achieved the record milestone, crossed the milestone of $400 billion worth of goods export. It achieved that target 9 days ahead of schedule. The Prime Minister had set the target. He congratulated all stakeholders, including our workers, our weavers, our farmers, our trade bodies, in achieving this milestone. Also on the show, we'll tell you where the Ukraine conflict is headed, even as President Joe Biden meets with the leaders of NATO and EU today in Brussels. President Zelensky of Ukraine shall be addressing this meeting virtually through a video link. And also, we'll tell you what really is happening when it comes to the world coming together in supporting the efforts of peace and reconciliation, and how it's affecting the dynamics of geopolitics. Well, that over the next 1 hour and much more. Let's begin with the headlines we're tracking at this hour. India achieved 400 billion goods exports target 9 days ahead of schedule. Prime Minister calls it key milestone in India's Atmanirbhar Bharat journey. Congratulates farmers, weavers, MSMEs, manufacturers, exporters for the success. Commerce Minister hails collective efforts of all stakeholders. Russian bombardment of Mariupol continues unabated. Pentagon says Ukrainian soldiers also continue their pushback against Russian forces. Reports of Ukrainian flag being raised again in the suburb of Makariv, which is west of capital Kyiv. US President Joe Biden to touch down in Brussels to attend the NATO and EU summit amid the Ukraine crisis. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO leaders likely to agree to deployment of 4 new NATO battle groups in Eastern Europe at an emergency summit. Ukraine President Zelensky to address the NATO summit virtually. Visiting Greek Foreign Affairs Minister Nikos Dendias says Greece aspires to become a strategic partner of India. India and Greece agree to enhance cultural and educational exchanges. Bilateral trade crosses $1 billion despite the challenges posed by the pandemic. Dual blow to Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan ahead of the no-confidence vote. 3 of his major allies joined the opposition alliance. Also faces a 50,000 rupee fine from Pakistan's top election body for violating election code of conduct. Women's world number 1 Ashley Barty announces retirement from tennis at the age of 25. World number 1 for more than 2 years. Barty retires after winning 3 Grand Slam singles titles. And now on to our top story. Despite the pandemic, India has achieved what skeptics saw as unachievable. Exports of goods touched $400 billion 9 days ahead of schedule. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership, as well as the coordinated efforts of both state and central governments, as well as stakeholders, made this target achievable. The contribution of farmers, MSMEs towards this milestone is also laudable. More in this report.
एक्सपोर्ट बढ़ाने के लिए 4 फैक्टर्स बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। पहला, देश में मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कई गुना बढ़े और क्वालिटेटिवली कॉम्पिटिटिव होना चाहिए। दूसरा, ट्रांसपोर्ट की, लॉजिस्टिक्स की दिक्कतें दूर हो। तीसरा, एक्सपोर्ट्स के साथ सरकार कंधे से कंधा मिलाकर के चले। भारतीय प्रोडक्ट्स के लिए इंटरनेशनल मार्केट, ये चारों फैक्टर्स एकजुट होंगे तभी भारत का लोकल ग्लोबल होगा।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's vision to boost exports becoming a reality. The result, India has achieved its highest ever goods export target of $400 billion 9 days ahead of schedule.
आज ही भारत ने 400 बिलियन डॉलर यानी 30 लाख करोड़ रुपए के प्रोडक्ट्स के एक्सपोर्ट का नया रिकॉर्ड बनाया है। भारत का बढ़ता हुआ एक्सपोर्ट हमारी इंडस्ट्री की शक्ति, हमारे एमएसएमईज, हमारी मैन्युफैक्चरिंग क्षमता, हमारे एग्रीकल्चर सेक्टर के सामर्थ्य का प्रतीक है।
In the April-December period, the figure stood at about $300 billion. This landmark achievement was possible in spite of the pandemic because of a whole government approach, with closer interaction at the level of states and districts.
I think we owe this $400 billion success story to the countless hours spent by everybody in Team India, as Mr. Sarangi rightly pointed out. It's truly a collective effort. We broke every silo within the government and within government and industry, between government and industry, or between government and stakeholders like exporters, logistics providers, our missions abroad. All silos were broken. And collectively, everybody worked to a common purpose.
In 2020-21, exports were $292 billion. This rose by 37% to India's highest ever goods export target of $400 billion in 2021-22. So what does it boil down to? How does the maths work here? It means that every month, India on an average is achieving $33 billion target. That leads to the fact that every day we have a target achieved of approximately $1 billion. That roughly translates to $46 million worth of exports every hour.
We have a diversified product mix and we also have a diversified geographical basket for our exports. For engineering goods, our exports were the highest to USA. For petroleum products to UAE, for gems and jewelry to China, and so on. This tells us that the Team India spirit that Honorable PM has been talking of makes it possible for achieving targets which might seemingly look impossible.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi congratulated all stakeholders. In a tweet, he said, India set an ambitious target of $400 billion of goods exports and achieves this target for the first time ever. I congratulate our farmers, weavers, MSMEs, manufacturers, exporters for this success. This is a key milestone in our Atmanirbhar Bharat journey. There was more direct engagement with the exporters as well as faster resolution of issues. Actively engaging with export promotion councils, industry associations and other stakeholders also helped in reaching this target. With Ajay Mishra, Newsnight Desk, DD India.
And that brings us to our In Focus tonight. Our In Focus tonight is local goes global, Indian exports at a record high. Yes, that's a point of discussion. Or In Focus tonight, local goes global, Indian exports at a record high. And to talk about that, I have with me Bharat Joshi. He's the co-chairman of the CII National Committee on Logistics. Welcome very much, Mr. Joshi, and thank you very much for joining us on the show. I'm joined by Bharat Joshi to discuss local goes global, Indian exports at a record high. Well, I have with me Bharat Joshi. Mr. Joshi, thank you very much for joining. Well, as our point in focus tonight is local goes global. The Prime Minister saying this is a major milestone in achieving Atmanirbhar Bharat. How did we achieve it? What was the difference, fundamental difference in approach which led to achieving this ambitious target, and that too much ahead of schedule?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. This is a very nuanced question, and I think in some ways also answered by the Honorable Prime Minister himself. He and some others alluded to Team India, which in some other ways could be defined as a nation as a whole, or India as a whole approach, by which I mean both private and public sectors working in tandem. Within the public sector, state governments, central governments, within the central government, perhaps for the first time in many years, not only the line ministries, for instance, commerce or heavy industry and so on, but also the Ministry of External Affairs playing a very important role as well. Within the private sector, taking an approach of the entire ecosystem. So not only the front lines of what we see in terms of exporters themselves, but also behind the curtain. So people like us. So I'm in the logistics industry. So logistics or tier 1 equipment suppliers, or tier 2 component suppliers, or then tier 3, and so on and so forth. So these were some of the success factors. In addition to this, a multitude of visionary initiatives which worked all together in unison, not as silos of isolation. The PLI, or the Production Linked Incentive Scheme, has worked rather well. So have many other new schemes that have been launched. There is an emphasis on trade facilitation. The NCTF action plan, or the National Commission on Trade Facilitation, is one of these, as is the new logistics policy. Something which we don't speak really often about or enough about is the PM's Gati Shakti program, which is seminal in terms of both this integration amongst government agencies, both federal and state, and also technologies, both blockchain, GIS, geographic information systems, and so forth. I could go on and on, but it really is an eye-opener of what prowess we can unleash, not only service exports, but also agri-exports, agriculture produce, as well as manufactured goods.
Okay. I remember, Mr. Joshi, last August when the Prime Minister called a meeting of the heads of missions, basically our ambassadors and high commissioners abroad, and he said that go look at each nook and corner where you can identify the scope for expanding our exports, especially the exports of our goods. Then he reaches out to the state governments, even to the district administrations. He says, identify where your strength lies, use your local...
Please could you give me half a moment?
Yes, please go ahead. Oh.
Please give me a moment. I think my connection is unstable. Just give me 5 seconds to switch over to a different network.
Okay, please go ahead. Okay.
I hope this is better now.
This is. So I was saying, I remember last August.
I got a question, sir. So, the Foreign Ministry, I think, has worked, seamlessly with all of the ministries. And, we see this manifested not only in the conclusion of some very important FTAs or free trade agreements with our very long-standing allies and partners, but also further realization and further implementation of existing FTAs. And the consequence of this has been not only widening the commodity basket and mix of what we can export in terms of market access, but also exporting to newer markets and exporting more to previous markets.
And the product diversification, the area diversification, I believe 200 odd territories were identified, where what is required, where can that come in India from, then set those targets down to district administrations here in our country, our missions coordinating with local markets there and giving it a boost. So really, what the Prime Minister said, that involving each and every stakeholder, be it from a diplomat to somebody like you, to an exporter, to a manufacturer, to a weaver, to a farmer.
Absolutely, sir. And this will only grow. I think the importance and the contribution of India to global supply chains and value chains will only very rapidly increase. We have now come to realize the importance of unbroken value chains, especially in the times of crises. And now people are talking increasingly about business continuity, robust and resilient supply chains, energy security, vaccine or medical security, food security, and so on. India, as you would recall, has seen zero outages, shortages, supply shocks without exception. And also India has been a very strong partner to various international companies, economies, countries, and will continue to do so. So I think India will become an increasingly predictable and trusted partner for this reason as well.
Okay. Are you confident then, Mr. Joshi, that this milestone that is achieved today of $400 billion, the upward trajectory would continue, and does the country have the capacity to do that?
I think we're barely scratching the surface. So in terms of capacity, I think we only just realized barely what we can achieve. Also, I allow myself to believe very honestly that because of systemic and structural reform, this will not only continue, it will increase many-fold in times to come. These government initiatives, the way that private and public sectors and many government agencies work together will only continue. And you see there are several, I've been talking about FTAs, there are a multitude of FTAs currently being negotiated. So, the writing, this movie isn't over yet. Just a few weeks ago, we had a very important FTA with our Emirati friends, the UAE, and there's some others just around the corner.
All right. We'll leave it there. Mr. Bharat Joshi, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure being with you.
And well, moving on in what's now a month-long conflict, Russia-Ukraine confrontation just doesn't seem to be ending. But hopes remain alive as the two sides continue their peace talks that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky calls tough. Take a look at this report.
Russia-Ukraine conflict is in its 28th day, but there is no sign of truce between two warring nations. Extensive damage has been reported from many cities, including the besieged port city of Mariupol. Satellite images show extensive damage to apartments and factory buildings in Mariupol. Mariupol has become the focus of the war that erupted when Russian President Vladimir Putin sent his troops across the border on what he calls a special military operation. In the capital Kyiv, Ukrainians cleared debris from their homes and the street outside on Wednesday after an explosion damaged a residential building. A damaged car with a shattered windscreen was parked outside as people picked glass from the building's smashed windows and the street. The Ukrainian capital continues to come under attack in the ongoing Russian onslaught on Ukraine. We were in the bedroom and I was sitting in the armchair watching television. When it exploded, I ran away to the kitchen and there was already everything damaged. Windows were blown, smoke and smell of burning, and I could not take anything from the rooms and we ran outside. In the meantime, Kyiv's mayor has claimed that Makariv and Irpin have been retaken from Russians.
This near to Brovary, it's open information. From the west of Ukraine, from the north in behind the Lutish, and there is big battle. And from official sources we receive information. Right now the small city Makariv and almost whole Irpin already in the control is Ukrainian soldier.
Russian forces have released a video showing its missile attack on Ukrainian arms depot outside the country's northwestern city of Rivne, destroying an arsenal of weapons and equipment. Thousands of civilians are stuck in the conflict zone as fierce fighting is underway. However, both Ukraine and Russia agreed to set up 9 humanitarian corridors on Wednesday to allow people to escape to safety. The agreement does not cover Mariupol. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said peace talks with Russia to end the month-long war have been tough and sometimes confrontational, but added step by step, we are moving forward. He said over 1 lakh people are living in the besieged city of Mariupol in inhuman conditions.
As of today, There are about 1 lakh people in the city Mariupol in inhuman conditions, completely blockaded, without food, without water, without medicines, subject to constant shelling, constant bombardment. For more than a week now, we have been trying to organize stable humanitarian corridors for Mariupol residents, and almost all our attempts, unfortunately, are disrupted by the Russian occupiers, by shelling or deliberate terror.
The Russian Defense Ministry has reported that pro-Russian self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic units took control over the town of Marinka in the Donetsk region and seized weapons from Ukrainian forces. In the meantime, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has said that Russia could use nuclear weapons if faced with an existential threat. In the series of his addresses to lawmakers worldwide, Ukrainian President Zelensky on Wednesday addressed the Japanese parliament. Thanking Japan for leading the way among Asian countries in condemning Russia's attack, he urged it to further step up sanctions on Russia. Meanwhile, ahead of Thursday's emergency meeting, NATO has warned Russia against using chemical weapons in Ukraine and pledges support for Kyiv, including cybersecurity assistance and equipment.
Any use of chemical weapons would totally change the nature of the conflict. And it will be a blatant violation of international law and will have far-reaching consequences. And I think that's the most important message to convey. NATO allies are in close contact. Russia must stop its nuclear saber rattling. This is dangerous and it is irresponsible. NATO is there to protect and defend all allies, and we convey a very clear message to Russia that the nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought.
Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has rejected a halt to Russian energy deliveries to Germany and Europe 2 days before the EU summit in Brussels. He, however, said Germany is committed to reducing dependence on Russian imports as quickly as possible.
We cannot leave anyone out in the cold on this. What we have, however, decided is to stop our dependency on Russian coal, gas and oil imports as quickly as possible, and we are working on this with the greatest intensity and speed. And if we manage a speedy diversification, then this effect, banning Russian gas imports, will happen automatically.
The US was the first Western power to ban Russian oil and gas after the fighting broke out. Now President Joe Biden is traveling to Europe later this week, where he will meet NATO allies, G7 and European Union leaders. Biden is likely to announce joint action on enhancing European energy security and reducing its dependence on Russian oil and natural gas. With agency's inputs, Newsnight Desk, DD India.
The Russia-Ukraine conflict has been described as a watershed moment in modern history, a turning point compared variedly to the 9/11 attacks or even the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Whether this view of the war turns out to be justified, only time will tell, but there's no doubt that the violent, tumultuous days after February 24th, the established international order has been shaken. Ukraine, earlier a little known and often ignored country, has overnight become the crucible of new world order. How? Let's understand. Well, is Ukraine really the crucible of the new world order? The nuclear threat is back. We heard Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO chief, talk about that. The threat of the nuclear. The Russians have said, well, if we are pushed against the wall, we can use the nuclear button. So something nuclear, the nuclear button was something after the World War II, and its horrific consequences was not talked about. But now the threat of nuclear war is back in focus. Well, the fears of a third world war. We've heard this third world war from the American president, from European leaders, saying that no, we do not wish to get into Ukraine because it will ignite a Third World War. We thought after World War I, after World War II, the world wars were so horrific that they had come to an end. Yes, there were regional conflicts, there were asymmetric conflicts, we saw terrorism raised its ugly head, but World War was widely believed that, there is a broad consensus that world wars wouldn't happen, but now the talk of World War is back. We don't know whether Third World War will happen or not, but yes, the talk about it, the threat of it is back. Well, the resultant global energy price rise and the retail inflation, we know how global oil supply chains will be affected. Even the very threat of cutting oil exports, though Europe is not on the same table, on the same page when it comes, there are differences within Europe and the United States, within countries within Europe. UK and the US believe, total cut should be done on oils and Russian oil and gas, whereas the Europeans believe that no, they cannot survive with that, and that will bite them more. But yes, it has, upset the apple cart and brought the big debate into focus. Well, the other big factor, China. Is China the big strategic winner in this all? Well, as this talk about cutting the imposing the sanctions, biting the Russians saying, well, if the Europeans and the West want to cut ties with us, impose sanctions with us, we've got our friends elsewhere. We've got a huge market like China. So China, the Americans are reaching out to the Chinese. So China is probably not directly involved. The American president spoke with President Xi Jinping, telling him why China should not get involved in it, either by providing military aid or even financial aid or market access to Russia, because that will help Russia. So clearly China is back in focus. Everybody's viewing China, and so China seems to be the big strategic winner of this conflict, though not directly involved in that. The resurrection of NATO. Now, the resurrection of NATO, which Emmanuel Macron famously described as brain death, going through brain death, he now says, well, this conflict has proved to be the electric shock which is putting it back into strategic focus. We all thought that NATO had lost its relevance within the NATO allies, within the NATO countries, but this conflict has brought NATO as a military alliance back into sharp focus, perhaps becoming the most important and most significant and emerging as the most powerful single bloc alliance, the military alliance that the world sees. So in that sense, the new world order realignments in the world are surfacing. How much they solidify remains to be seen. That will depend on how and where the conflict goes from here. And that brings us to our second in focus tonight, Ukraine conflict, emergence of a new world order. That's our second point of discussion in focus tonight, Ukraine conflict, emergence of a new world order. And to talk about that, I'm joined by SR Tayal, former senior diplomat, who's joining me to discuss that. Ambassador Tayal, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Do you believe, Ambassador Tayal, that a new world order is emerging, or at least realignments are taking shape, and the settled world order which we thought had implanted itself after perhaps the fall of the Berlin Wall or even 9/11, broadly that world order was here to stay, but this conflict has changed it all?
I would say that yes, the world order is changing. It was changing for the last decade or so because of the rise of China and the expansionist tendencies of China. But this war on Ukraine by Russia has once again challenged the basic premise on which the post-World War II security and strategic architecture was based, that territorial integrity and sovereignty of all the countries should be respected. Of course, it has been violated earlier also. America and West invaded Iraq without any justification. They destroyed Libya. China has been doing it in South China Sea, and very blatantly that maritime sovereignty of Philippines, etc., is being violated. But this latest eruption of violence in Europe has, as you mentioned, brought the talk of a nuclear war and a third world war in the realm of possibility. It is unlikely to happen because President Vladimir Putin has taken a very rash stand by invading Ukraine. But President Joe Biden, as well as all the leaders of NATO, President Macron, Scholz, Germany, they are very clear that if NATO intervenes in Ukraine, then all bets are off. It can go anywhere. But they have repeatedly made these statements that NATO, West Europe, United States will not physically intervene in Ukraine. But having said that, let us look at the long-term implications. Whatever happens in Ukraine, whichever way the conflict ends, short of Third World War or nuclear war, it will signal a weakening of Russia, a more isolationist Russia, a more hardliner, Stalinist, Soviet type of Russia. Number two, NATO is getting resurrected, but Germany was Germany. It is a unified Germany. It is the strongest economy in West Europe. It will now have the strongest army in West Europe. And if you see 10-20 years ahead, there could be a democratic change in Germany, and Germany could again become very, very dominant and aggressive in Europe. So one would see four centers of power: United States, Germany-led Europe, Russia weakening, and China. And in my view, the biggest gainer will be China.
Okay. And, but you know, Ambassador Tayal, as you were also saying, post-World War II, you know, it was settled debate that yes, there have conflicts taken place, regional conflicts taken place, a few of them you've mentioned, but redrawing of boundaries was considered that, you know, it's settled. The countries have taken shape. Redrawing of boundaries did happen. For example, Crimea, the annexation of Crimea, but invasion, a full-fledged invasion of a country in terms of that, is that something which is again back into sharp focus? And does that say, what if right now the NATO is saying it will not intervene in Ukraine, but is saying that if a spillover happens, we will retaliate with equal force? And so if that, how possible is that? How strong is that apprehension?
Yes, that is the worry. Yes, borders have changed. Yugoslavia broke up in 7 countries. But you are right that one major power has not really attacked a smaller country. And there are red lines. We all remember that the Second World War started with Germany's invasion of Poland. On 1st of September 1939, Poland was invaded. And on 3rd of September 1939, Britain and France declared war on Germany. So President Biden is going to Poland, and that is a clear signal to Russia, to President Putin, that okay, Ukraine, you do what you like because, or what you may, because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. But if you cross the border and threaten any country of NATO, any member of NATO, then all these reservations which NATO and US have, they will disappear and they will take on Russia. And again, see, nuclear war is easy to threaten. It is not that the United States dropped bombs in Japan because it was 5,000 kilometers away. Any nuclear war in Europe will also be very, very harmful to Russia. Of course, it will destroy Europe. So I believe everybody is wise, but it will have very long-term implications. That country there will be more diversion of resources to armaments and defense and energy. Again, there will be a diversion of sourcing from Russia. That means coal-based power stations may come back, nuclear power stations may come back. So the climate change battle will become even more difficult. So there will be very grave implications in several fields affecting the entire globe.
Ambassador, the dangerous part is both sides are accusing each other. Today, look at Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO chief statement today, saying that it will be very unwise of Russia. It's a dangerous proposition when they talk of a nuclear attack. Look at what the Russians have been saying. Russians are saying the Americans are building nuclear facilities in Ukraine, arming Ukraine with nuclear arsenal. When Ukraine gave up its weapons, we were bound to protect them, but it is now the Americans who are breaching agreements and making Ukraine nuclear capable. So now when accusations and counter accusations fly, there is always the danger of a small hack in the stay setting the fire.
Very true. There is a lot of merit in what President Putin has been saying, that expansion of NATO up to Ukraine, up to Finland, etc., would be very, very detrimental to Russian security. So yes, there is some justification, and I for one put more blame on the United States and Europe for pushing Ukraine in that very suicidal direction. But that is past. But where we are today, again, nuclear weapons are really weapons of deterrence. And if they are used, Russia is not like Soviet Union. Soviet Union and United States have absolutely like a trigger-ready arsenal against each other, but they never attacked. But Cuba was the red line, and America, both Russia and America compromised, if you remember Cuba, and America had removed its weapons, nuclear weapons, from Greece and Turkey at that time, that the compromise which happened. So I believe that some compromise will happen, and this threat coming from President Putin and his advisors about nuclear weapons is just to make sure that NATO and US adhere to their promise that they will not militarily intervene in Ukraine.
All right. Well, let's see where this goes. Today, the all-important meeting where President Biden is attending with other NATO leaders, then emergency summit. We'll see what happens there. Thank you, Ambassador Esatal, for joining us and sharing your insights with us. Thank you. And the Foreign Minister of Greece, Nikos Dendias, is on a two-day visit to India. This is his first visit to India. Dendias met External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar at the Hyderabad House. Here's more.
Foreign Affairs Minister of Greece, Nikos Dendias, is on a two-day visit to India. This is his first visit to the country. Dendias met External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar at Hyderabad House in New Delhi on Wednesday. In his opening remarks, Dr. S. Jaishankar recalled his visit to Athens and said that the discussions would capture a significant perspective from another part of the world.
When I came to your country, you were marking the 200 years of your independence. This is actually 75 years of our independence, so it's also interesting in terms of anniversaries. When we look at the world, our thinking is so similar. And it is of great value to me that our discussions would capture a perspective from another part of the world, a very important part of the world right now.
In his remarks, Greek Foreign Affairs Minister Nikos Dendias said that Greece aspires the relation with India to become a strategic one.
We aspire our relation to become a strategic one. And I hope that Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Mitsotakis will meet shortly. We see many things in a very similar way. international law, sovereignty, human rights, prohibition of use of force, and a second commitment to international law of the sea, to UNCLOS. This is also and maritime security.
After the talks, External Affairs Minister in a tweet mentioned that both the countries will work together on maritime issues, and the Ukraine situation, Mediterranean and European Union were discussed in the talks. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and Greek Foreign Affairs Minister Nikos Dendias signed Declaration of Intent on Migration and Mobility and Cultural and Educational Exchange Program. External Affairs Minister also welcomed Greece's ratification of its membership of the International Solar Alliance. It was discussed that the 8th round of Joint Economic Committee meeting will be held at Athens on 15th April 2022, which will provide further impetus to trade and investment ties. Both ministers appreciated that trade has shown a significant increase and has crossed $1 billion despite the challenges posed by the pandemic. Developments pertaining to the European Union, Eastern Mediterranean, Afghanistan and Ukraine were discussed. It was also agreed that the next round of Foreign Office consultations will be held soon. Cultural and Education Exchange Program for the 5-year period of 2022 to 26 was signed during the visit. The ministers also discussed the possibility of enhancement of the bilateral relationship to a strategic partnership. Later in the day, Minister Dendias also called on Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu. The Vice President had a discussion on bilateral cooperation with the Greek Foreign Minister. Meghna Dev's report, DD India.
And Foreign Minister of Oman met with External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar in New Delhi on Wednesday. Both ministers discussed growing cooperation in the fields of political engagement, economy, defense, energy, people-to-people ties. An agreement in the field of cooperation in the field of science and technology cooperation was inked between the two sides. Both the nations also agreed to scale up cooperation in maritime security to ensure safety in the region. The leaders also exchanged views on the situation in Gulf, Yemen and Ukraine. Oman's foreign minister is also expected to call on Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu on Thursday. And let's now get you news from across the world in our segment World Wrap.
In a big blow to Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan ahead of the no-confidence vote, 3 major allies of the ruling government have decided to join the opposition alliance. Local media reported that 3 major coalition partners of the ruling government, MQMP, PMLQ and Balochistan Awami Party, have decided to stand with the opposition. Imran Khan's party is facing an internal revolt, with several members of the National Assembly deserting the PTI and joining the opposition ranks. Meanwhile, Pakistan's top election body has imposed a fine of 50,000 rupees on Imran Khan for violating election code of conduct by addressing a rally in Swat ahead of the local government election in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. In a dramatic turn of events, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan ordered closure of secondary schools for girls on Wednesday, just hours after these reopened for the first time since last August, when the Islamic movement seized power in the country for a second time. Teenage girls across Afghanistan were supposed to return to schools after being banned by the Taliban earlier. Since taking over power in August last year, the Taliban have rolled back women's rights in virtually every area, including crushing women's freedom of movement. Meanwhile, the United Nations has condemned reports that the Taliban extended their indefinite ban on allowing female students above the 6th grade access to schools. Island nation Sri Lanka posted soldiers at hundreds of state-run gas stations to help distribute fuel after a sudden rise in prices of key commodities and accompanying shortages forced tens of thousands of people to queue for hours. Sri Lanka is battling a foreign exchange crisis that forced a currency devaluation and hit payments for essential imports such as food, medicine and fuel, prompting it to turn to the International Monetary Fund for help. Military spokesman said that at least 2 army personnel would be stationed at every fuel pump to help organize fuel distribution, but the soldiers would not be involved in crowd control. A black box from the crashed China Eastern airliner was recovered on Wednesday as investigators tried to piece together what made a jet carrying 132 passengers nosedive into a mountainside in southern China. The cause of the disaster has mystified aviation authorities who have scoured rugged terrain for clues, finding no survivors from what is almost certain to be China's deadliest plane crash in nearly 30 years. The ill-fated flight was en route from the southwestern city of Kunming to Guangzhou on the coast on Monday when the Boeing 737-800 jet suddenly plunged from cruising altitude at about the time when it should have started its descent ahead of landing. Authorities in the Chinese city of Shanghai have denied rumors of a citywide lockdown after the sixth straight increase in daily asymptomatic coronavirus cases pushed its count to record levels despite a campaign of mass testing aimed at stifling the spread. The latest outbreak in China's wealthy commercial hub remains tiny by global standards, but authorities are proceeding with the testing campaign that has seen many people locked in residential compounds for days as the city implements a national dynamic clearance policy aimed at stamping out flare-ups as they arise.
And in an important development, Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla today addressed the UN Security Council, a meeting on cooperation between the UN and the League of Arab States. This is what he said. Let's listen in.
At the outset, let me extend my felicitations to His Excellency, Mr. Khalifa Shaheen Al-Maraj, Minister of State of the United Arab Emirates, for chairing today's meeting on cooperation between the United Nations and the League of Arab States. I also welcome the presence of the UN Secretary General and the Secretary General of the League of Arab States and thank them for their valuable insights. I would like to thank the representative of civil society, Ms. Razlan Farhan Al-Keel, for her briefing. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate the delegation of the UAE for their steadfast stewardship of the Council for this month, as well as for successfully piloting the presidential statement in the Council on the UN League of Arab States cooperation. For over a millennia, the Arab world has been a cradle of human civilization. Given its strategic location, developments in the Arab world have influenced our shared history, and they continue to have a profound impact globally. The challenges confronted by the region today and how we address them will have a critical bearing on international peace and security. India and the Arab world share a civilizational relationship underpinned by strong people-to-people relations and commercial and cultural ties. Trade between India and the Arab region through the Indian Ocean had flourished for several centuries, even before the advent of modern commerce. The Indian rupee was legal tender in parts of the Arab world not very long ago. Today, countries from the Arab world are host to more than 9 million Indians, and India's wide-ranging partnership with these countries encompasses every aspect of human endeavor, from agriculture, trade, commerce and education to clean energy, counterterrorism and new technologies. India and the League of Arab States signed an MOU 2 decades ago for institutionalizing a regular dialogue process to forge a partnership for the future. It led to the creation of the India League of Arab States Forum, during which progressive cooperation in several fields like energy, environmental protection, investment, food security, science and technology, and human resource development were agreed upon. Several other initiatives to deepen our engagement with the League of Arab States have also been conceptualized, including the Energy Symposium, Media Symposium, and the first edition of the Arab India Energy Forum, which was successfully convened a few months ago. Mr. President, the League of Arab States has contributed positively to security and stability in the region. Its member states are significant troop and police contributors to UN peacekeeping forces. The Arab states are among the largest donors of humanitarian assistance to countries facing armed conflict in the region. The League has played an important role in the areas of mediation, conflict prevention, and resolution in the region. Today's meeting provides us with a valuable opportunity to take a closer look at the cooperation between the United Nations and the League of Arab States. We underline that the League of Arab States can further contribute in our joint endeavor for peace, for the sake of the people of the region in general and women and minorities in particular. We take note of the positive trajectory of the cooperation, including through the UN Liaison Office in Cairo and the practice of annual briefings by the Secretary General to this Council. In this regard, I would like to submit 4 proposals, specific suggestions for consideration by the Council. First, there must be greater policy synergy between the two organizations. Regular and frequent consultations with the League of Arab States and its members on peace initiatives in the region would contribute towards achieving common solutions and meaningful outcomes. Second, efforts must be made to achieve comprehensive coordination at the field level, especially through regular coordination between the UN Special Envoys and Special Representatives and the League of Arab States. Third, engagement with the League and its members in post-conflict peace briefing through reconstruction and economic development is equally important. And fourth, ensuring the stability of the countries concerned and the region and the welfare of people, especially women and minorities, should be at the forefront of all such efforts. The cooperation between the UN and the League of Arab States is of critical importance when it comes to the Middle East peace process. Both organizations must take concerted efforts to support the reactivation of the Middle East peace process in line with the two-state solution based on the internationally agreed framework and previous agreements between the parties. India welcomes the agreement for normalization of relations between countries in the region, which we believe will contribute to greater peace and stability in the region. Mr. President, let me conclude by expressing India's steadfast support for a closer, meaningful and sustained cooperation between the United Nations and the League of Arab States for the benefit of the region. India will continue to partner with the Arab countries in their efforts to achieve regional peace, stability and prosperity, and will continue to work with the League of Arab States in combating terrorism and in promoting tolerance and pluralism. I thank you, Mr. President.
And let's now take a look at what else is making news from across the country.
Pushkar Singh Dhami was sworn in as the 11th Chief Minister of Uttarakhand at the parade ground in Dehradun. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Union Minister Amit Shah, Defence Minister Rajnath Singh and BJP Chief JP Nadda attended the ceremony. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has inaugurated Biplabi Bharat Gallery at Victoria Memorial Hall, Kolkata on the occasion of Shaheed Divas through video conferencing. Remembering the great patriots of the country, Prime Minister said that every child will take inspiration from the stories of sacrifice of Amar Shaheed Bhagat Singh, Rajguru and Sukhdev. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also expressed his sorrow and condolences for the violent incident in Birbhum, West Bengal, and hoped that the state government will definitely punish those who commit such heinous crimes in West Bengal. A team of State Forensic Science Laboratory and SIT have reached Birbhum's Rampur Hat today for further investigation. The National Commission for Women and National Commission for Protection of Child Rights have also taken cognizance of the incident. The National Commission for Women has written to DGP West Bengal and SP Birbhum to arrest and take stringent action against the culprits. The Bharatiya Janata Party has sought the resignation of Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee and has demanded an investigation into the incident by central agencies. Meanwhile, taking suo motu cognizance of the violence in Birbhum, the Calcutta High Court directed the state government to install CCTV cameras at the crime scene and ensure witnesses are protected. A bench headed by Chief Justice ordered the Central Forensic Science Laboratory to visit the scene of the crime and collect necessary evidence.
In response to media queries on reference to the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir made by Chinese Foreign Minister in his speech to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in Pakistan, India has rejected the uncalled reference by the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi during his speech at the opening ceremony. The Ministry of External Affairs has said that the matters related to the UT of Jammu and Kashmir are entirely internal matters of India. Other countries, including China, have no locus standi to comment on that. They should take note. They should note that India refrains from public judgment of their internal issues. And this is what India's response has been to Wang Yi's comment at the OIC. Amid easing COVID restrictions, the famous Tulip Garden in Srinagar opened for visitors today. So if you haven't already planned a visit to Srinagar this spring, make sure you add it to your bucket list.
Thinking of Kashmir brings before us images of snow-capped mountains, lush green gardens and apple orchards. Often compared with Switzerland, Kashmir has never failed to impress its visitors. And come spring, Kashmir's Tulip Garden adds to the beauty and allure of Srinagar. Kashmir is witnessing a massive rush of visitors this year amid easing COVID restrictions, and the Tulip Garden, which opened on Wednesday, is one of the major attractions.
यहाँ पर जो टुलिप गार्डन जो है बहुत ही बेहतरीन और बहुत ही उम्दा किस्म का है और ये जो सीनरी है यहाँ की बहुत ही खूबसूरत है।
हम खुश नसीब है कि हमको ये सब देखने को मिल रहा है और बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है हमको, इतना एंजॉय कर रहे हैं हम लोग के बहुत।
नो डाउट कश्मीर जन्नत ही है और मैं तो कहूँगी जन्नत मैंने देखा नहीं तो शायद जन्नत इससे खूबसूरत है या नहीं मुझे नहीं पता, मेरे लिए यही जन्नत है। और ट्यूलिप गार्डन के लिए मैं कहूँगी कि मैं बहुत लकी हूँ कि मैं ये देख पा रही हूँ, क्योंकि हम लोग को कल वापस राजस्थान जाना है तो वी वर नॉट श्योर कि आज ये खुला मिलेगा या नहीं मिलेगा।
आई वॉज जस्ट प्लानिंग टू रिटर्न और मुझे न्यूज़ आया व्हाट्सएप के थ्रू कि आज ओपनिंग है, एंड पिछली बार भी मैं आया था तो आई मिस्ड इट आउट, बट इस बार मुझे ट्यूलिप गार्डन का फेस्टिवल मिल गया एंड आई एम thinking that I'm really lucky and very happy.
Housing over 1 million tulips, it is Asia's largest tulip garden and is a major tourist attraction that leads to revenue generation for Jammu and Kashmir.
लोगों की आमदनी को भी इजाफा होगा यहाँ पे जो लोग रहते हैं, और हम उम्मीद रखते हैं कि सब लोग इसमें ताबून करेंगे और यहाँ से जो टूरिस्ट आते हैं वो बिल्कुल सेटिस्फाई होके जाएंगे कि इससे बेहतर कोई जगह नहीं। ट्यूलिप गार्डन जैसे कोई छटा आपको हिंदुस्तान के और किसी जगह में नहीं मिलेगी, तो बेहतर है कि यहाँ पे भी एक बार आना और देखना चाहिए।
Apart from boosting tourism in the valley, the administration is committed to keeping COVID-19 in check. So the administration has made proper arrangements for testing visitors for COVID at the garden.
हमारी 2-3 कोविड टेस्टिंग फैसिलिटीज़ बाहर हैं, 1-2 टीम्स हमारी गार्डन में भी हैं, और आप देख सकते हैं कि जो भी टूरिस्ट आते हैं वो वॉलंटियरली अपना कोविड टेस्ट भी करा रहे हैं और हमने यहाँ पे फ्री डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ मास्क सैनिटाइजर्स रखा है। साथ में हमारा एक आईसी कैंपेन भी चल रहा है जहाँ से हम अनाउंसमेंट्स करते हैं कि कोविड अप्रोप्रिएट बिहेवियर हमने रखना है, हमने रखा था, रखना भी है और ज़रूरी भी है।
The annual Tulip Festival, which falls in April, attracts tourists from all over the world at the onset of spring. And the happy faces of visitors show that Tulip Garden is successfully living up to its beautiful image. Bureau Report, DD India.
Well, let's talk about Ash Barty. Surprisingly, she retired from tennis at the age of 25 while ranked #1 and less than 2 months after winning the Australian Open for her 3rd Grand Slam singles title. Barty won her first Grand Slam at the 2019 French Open. She has remained the top-ranked player since then, backed up by success at Wimbledon last year. In January, she became the first home player to win the Australian Open men's or women's singles title in 44 years.
World #1 Ashley Barty has shocked the sporting world by announcing that she will retire from professional tennis at just the age of 25. The Australian made the announcement on social media on Wednesday, saying she was leaving to chase other dreams. Barty, 25, is the current world #1 and has held that ranking for 114 consecutive weeks, the 4th longest streak in WTA's history. She is the reigning champion of both Wimbledon and the Australian Open and has won more titles since the beginning of 2017 than any other player on the women's tour.
It's hard to say, but I'm so happy and I'm so ready, and I just know at the moment in my heart for me as a person, this is right. And I know I've done this before, but in a very different feeling, and I'm so grateful to everything that tennis has given me. It's given me all of my dreams plus more, but I know that the time is right now for me to step away and chase other dreams, and to put the rackets down.
The only comparable tennis retirement would be Belgian star Justin Henin, who also called time on her career while holding the #1 ranking. But even when Henin announced her retirement in the year 2008, it wasn't off the back of a major triumph. After falling in the semi-finals of the 2020 Australian Open, just as COVID-19 began spreading around the globe, Barty opted to remain in Australia and skip the rest of the season.
You work so hard your whole life for one goal, and I've been able to share that with so many incredible people, but to be able to win Wimbledon, which was my dream, the one true dream that I wanted in tennis, that really changed my perspective. And there was just a little part of me that wasn't quite satisfied, wasn't quite fulfilled. And then came the challenge of the Australian Open, and I think that for me just feels like the most perfect way, my perfect way, to celebrate what an amazing journey my tennis career has been. As a person, this is what I want. I want to chase after some other dreams that I've always wanted to do.
She would return in 2021, winning Wimbledon in July before adding her home title of the Australian Open 7 months later. Barty's win in Melbourne earlier this year put her in rare ceremony. Of active players, she joined Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, Novak Djokovic and Serena Williams as players to have won major singles title on all 3 surfaces. This is not the first time that Barty has walked away from tennis. She was the Wimbledon junior champion at the age of 15 in the year 2011, but left the tour entirely for nearly 2 years in 2014 because of burnout, saying she was overwhelmed by the pressure and the travel required. She played professional cricket back at home in Australia, then eventually picked up a racket once again and returned to tennis. Barty went on to win singles major championships on 3 different surfaces: on clay at the 2019 French Open, on grass at Wimbledon last year, and on the hard courts of Melbourne Park in January, becoming the first Australian player in 44 years to triumph at the nation's Grand Slam tournament. Sports Desk, DD India.
So that might be shocking for many of us, but she says she has other dreams to chase. On that note, we'll call it a close in Newsnight. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.